Hello and welcome back to another elementary behavior analysis help video. In today's video, I'm going to go over identifying patterns in graphs. So we will go over a quick review of trends and types of patterns that we might see in different graphs, and also example graphs and how we would go about describing them. So first here we have an increasing trend. So with an increasing trend, we can see that it is both stable and linear. So the data points in this trend obviously will increase, and we also see that they stay pretty close to this line, which means there's not a whole lot of variation. We would also see, if we saw a graph like this, we would say that there's minimal bounce because, as I stated, the data points do not change very much. They stay very stable. We also have a decreasing trend, which is very similar, just in the opposite direction. So instead, the data points would be decreasing. Again, a graph like this is considered to be stable and linear with minimal bounce. So with both of these, it would depend on the behavior you're targeting. So with a decreasing trend, if you had a behavioral excess and you saw a trend like this, that would mean that your intervention or treatment was working because it is getting that behavior to decrease. The next one we have is called flat or level. This again is considered pretty stable. While we don't see a trend, we do see minimal bounce. It stays very close to this line here. There are some points that go above and below, but for the most part, it remains stable. Cyclical graph is another one that we would consider stable. While the data points do vary, they remain very consistent. In this graph, we see the points between 3 and 5, and they consistently shift between those 2 points. So we would consider this stable as well. The next one we have is unstable or variable, and as the name suggests, this would be unstable. Here we do not see any real pattern. The data points are really all over the chart. They increase and decrease at different points during the time period, and so really if you saw something like this, that would really tell you that the intervention or treatment that you're doing is really not working and that you would maybe want to consider something else because you're not getting any real clear data from this graph. Okay, and with that, we're going to go through a couple examples. So here's our first example graph. I would suggest that you maybe pause the video and try to describe it the best that you can before I go through it, and just see what kind of trends, what kind of patterns you notice, and see what you can do. With that, I'm going to go ahead and go through it. So the first thing that we notice is that there's an increasing trend. We see across the graph that the data points consistently increase, and with the exception of a couple points, they really do not decrease. So we would consider this an increasing trend. As we discussed before, this is stable and it's linear. There are not too many changes that occur. There's minimal bounce. This example graph is pretty straight, so there's really very little bounce at all. Sorry about that. So yeah, with a graph like this, it's pretty simple and straightforward. We can see that it's just a steady increase. There's not a lot of variation, and this is kind of something, this is a pattern that you would want to see in your data in most cases because it does show that it's stable. Okay, so this is our next graph. Again, you can pause it to try to work through it. This one turned out a little bit fuzzy, but I think you can still see the main points. So we're going to go through that. Okay, so on this first side, it doesn't specifically say that this is the baseline, but in a lot of cases, the first phase will be baseline behavior. So we're just going to go with that for this example. So we can see that the data is flat. There's not a lot of variation. The rate is high, but the data points themselves show a flat pattern. So again, that would be stable. There's no trend and there's minimal bounce between the points. So they all stay around the same rate. And so that would show us a stable pattern of the behavior. So then they implemented a treatment, and here we can see that this one is a lot more variable. I would consider this one to be unstable because there's a lot of bounce. There's not really a trend. It kind of goes up and down at different points. And yeah, so we see the bounce, we see that it is considered unstable. So in this case, whoever is working on this treatment may want to consider changing it up a little bit so that they can get the pattern of this behavior to be more stable. All right, and this is our final example that I'm going to go through. Feel free to pause it and try to work through it if you can. Okay, so this one on this side is highly variable. We see the points are kind of all over the place. They go up, they go down. There's really no patterns that we can see. There's a lot of bounce, and there's no trend. There's no point where it seems to steadily increase or decrease. It just changes a lot during this treatment period. And again, it's variable, and we would say that this is unstable. When they move into the next treatment, it does appear to be a lot more stable. There is no trend. There's minimal bounce, so the data points stay pretty close to this frequency. And to me, it looks like the first half of these data points stay pretty flat, but in the second half, they appear to be more cyclical because you'll see a consistent pattern between these data points. And so to me, it looks like it becomes cyclical. I would like to note that we learn that it's important to have stable data before you move between treatment phases, but this does not have to always be the case. For example, if a behavior is dangerous, like here we see that this behavior is hitting others, so it may have been getting dangerous, and we also see that they had been working on that for 2 weeks. So with 2 weeks with no change, you don't want to just keep going forever. So that's probably the combination of those two is probably why they decided to move on to treatment. But in general, you would like to try to get your data stable before you change treatments. But yeah, with that, I hope that these helped and gave a little bit more help with how you would go about identifying patterns within a graph and how you would evaluate and describe graphs that you may come across. All right, thank you.